The crystal stopped ringing the instant the check hit the marble pass. $100,000, signed in violet ink, sliding across the steel toward a row of caterers who had been trained their whole lives to keep their eyes on the floor. The man who'd thrown it down was laughing at them, daring them, calling them background. And then a 29-year-old server set down her tray, wiped her hands on a side towel, and reached for an apron that wasn't hers. After that, nobody in the room remembered how to make a sound. The restaurant was called Orel, and on the night this happened, it was the most expensive square footage in Lower Manhattan. It sat on the 44th floor of a glass tower, all bronze and bone-colored leather, with windows that turned the city into a circuit board far below. The private room at the back had been cleared for the evening so that Roman Ashby could celebrate himself in peace. There were oysters flown in from Brittany that morning. There was a sommelier whose only job for the next 4 hours was to keep 3 magnums of grower champagne from ever sitting still. There was the particular hush of money that has stopped needing to prove anything to anyone and proves it anyway. The occasion was a victory, though only half the guests could have told you what kind. Earlier that week, Ashby Hospitality Group had finished swallowing a small company that owned a 41-year-old supper club in the West Village called Margolis. It was the sort of place with cracked leather booths and a maitre d' who knew your grandmother. The kind of restaurant that had fed 3 generations of one neighborhood and never once turned a real profit. Roman bought the building, the liquor license, and the name, then closed all of it inside a single afternoon. 38 people lost their jobs. He told the press he was elevating the footprint. Tonight he was drinking to the elevation. He was 46 and looked like a man who spent a great deal on looking 38. He had been, 20 years ago, a genuinely gifted cook, the youngest chef in the city to earn 3 stars, and somewhere along the way he had traded the cooking for the empire and decided the empire was the higher art. He wore his whites, unbuttoned over a charcoal cashmere tee, a costume that said he could still work a line if he chose to, which he hadn't in 9 years. The watch on his wrist cost more than the supper club had cleared in a decade. He was clever, and he was cruel, and the cruelty was the part he'd polished, because cruelty in a room full of people who needed something from you was simply another form of leverage. Across the room, threading between the tables with a tray of empty Kumamoto shells balanced flat on her palm, Delia Marsh was trying very hard to be furniture. She was 29. She'd been on her feet since 2 that afternoon, and the orthopedic shoes she wore under her black uniform trousers had stopped helping somewhere around the 7 o'clock seating. She worked events for a staffing company that fed bodies to rooms like this one all over the city, and she was good at it. Good in the specific invisible way that the best floor staff are good, anticipating a refill before the glass was empty, clearing a course without anyone registering that their plate had gone. Tonight she needed the shift more than she'd needed any single shift in months. Her brother Eli's tuition installment was due Friday. The shift paid $210. The math in her head never stopped running. What none of them knew, because there was no reason any of them would, was that 8 years ago Delia Marsh had been the most talked about student at the Culinary Institute of America. She'd come up to Hyde Park on a full scholarship out of a town in central Pennsylvania, and within her first year an old French instructor named Chef Wexler, a man who handed out praise the way the IRS handed out refunds, had started telling people she was the one. By her 3rd year, she'd taken 2nd at a regional competition that fed talent toward the Bocuse d'Or, the closest thing the cooking world has to the Olympics. Wexler told her she'd be running a 3-star kitchen by 30. He used to stand behind her at the stove, with his arms crossed, watching her hands, and say nothing, which, from him, was the whole symphony. Then her father's tremor turned out to be the start of something, with a longer name, and the longer name turned out to be expensive, and there was no one else. Her mother had been gone since Delia was 16. Eli was 11 when the diagnosis came. So she packed her knives into the same canvas roll she still owned, and she came back down to the city, and she started carrying other people's plates, and she did not cook anything that mattered for almost 5 years, because the grief of it was a thing she could not afford to feel and still get out of bed. Her father had died 14 months ago. The debt had not. Neither had Eli, who was 19 now and studying nursing at a community college in Queens, and who Delia would have walked into the ocean for. So she carried the oyster shells, and she kept her head down, and she waited for Roman Ashby to finish whatever Roman Ashby was building toward, because she could feel him building toward something the way you feel weather coming. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The room turned to him like a field of sunflowers. "I want to say something about excellence," Roman began, and a few of the junior partners near the front actually leaned in. Because the man could give a speech, you had to grant him that. He walked toward the open demonstration kitchen that ran along the back wall. A working station, brass and blued steel, with a flat top and a wall of copper that Orel's guests liked to watch the cooks perform behind during tasting menus. He let his hand drift along the edge of the range as he talked. "There are people in this world who create," he said, "and there are people who serve. It is not a moral statement, it's a fact, like gravity. Some of us are born with a thing in our hands and our palate that cannot be taught, and the rest organize themselves around us. They take our coats. They clear our plates." He smiled, warm, terrible. "There's dignity in it, I'd never say there isn't, but let's not pretend the two are the same animal." He picked up a pan. He told a story about his mother dragging him to a stove at 9 years old, about how he'd hated it and mastered it anyway, because that was who he was. Because excellence didn't care whether you loved the work, only whether you had the blood for it. And then, because he was a showman and the room wanted a show, he cooked. He'd had a station prepped, of course he had. He built a dish in front of them with the speed of a card sharp, a seared foie gras the size of a deck of cards, a flame of armagnac that went up 2 feet, and pulled a gasp from the tables. A quick gas streak slashed across the plate in a single arrogant stroke. Gold leaf laid on with tweezers like he was decorating a wound. It was fast, and it was flashy, and the plating was immaculate, every dot placed with a ruler's confidence. When he set it down on the pass and stepped back, the room broke into real applause. Delia, 10 feet away, watched the whole thing and felt something old and quiet turn over inside her, because she could see what the room couldn't. She could see that the foie had been kissed a beat too long and would taste of its own scorch. She could see that the gas streak had broken at the edge, the sugar separating, a flaw you'd only catch if you'd reduced 10,000 of them yourself. It was a plate built to be photographed and never tasted. It was dominance with a garnish, but she said nothing, because saying something was not in the job, and she had a tuition payment due Friday. "Now," Roman said, reaching into the breast pocket of his whites, "I'm feeling generous." He produced a folded check and a fountain pen, uncapped it with his teeth, and wrote standing up against the marble. He tore it free and laid it on the steel pass where everyone could see the violet zeros. $100,000, he announced, to anyone in this room, anyone who can stand at this range right now and cook me something better than what I just made. Anyone at all. The executives laughed and looked at their shoes. They knew better than to step into a trap a man like Roman had spent his whole life learning to set. "Come on," he said, scanning the floor, and his eyes did a thing then that Delia recognized, a slow, predatory sweep that landed, just for a second, on the line of catering staff by the kitchen doors. 50 people. Surely one of you fancies yourself. Or is it just as I said? Some are born to cook, the rest are born to carry. And that was the moment a half-drunk vice president took a step backward to get out of his boss's sightline and put the full weight of his shoulder into Delia Marsh. The tray went. She caught most of it on instinct, the canvas roll reflexes that never leave you, but 3 of the wide oyster plates slid off the lip and met the marble floor with a crack that tore through the room like a rifle shot. Porcelain skated in every direction. 46 people turned at once. She was already on her knees, face going hot, gathering the shards with her bare hands the way you do when your body wants to disappear faster than your mind can plan it. Well, well. Roman's voice came down on her like a slow tide. He walked over, unhurried, his loafers stopping a foot from where she crouched. It seems we have a volunteer. A few of the men laughed. The catering manager, a soft, anxious man named Pell, came hurrying out from the back, already apologizing with his whole body. Mr. Ashby, I'm so sorry. She'll be off the floor immediately. Look at her, Roman said, ignoring him, addressing the room now, playing the crowd. Clumsy. Can't carry a tray of empties across an empty floor. This, he gestured down at her, at the messy knot of her hair, at the uniform, is precisely what I'm talking about. You ever held a real knife, sweetheart? Or just a credit card reader? She kept picking up the porcelain. Off the floor immediately. The words had teeth. Off the floor meant no shift pay. No shift pay meant Friday. Friday meant Eli's name coming off a registrar's list, the small ordinary catastrophe she had built her entire bent-double life around preventing, and something that had been packed in ice for 5 years cracked, and the cold of it ran straight up her spine. She set the broken plate down. She stood. She wiped her palms slowly on the towel at her hip, and she did not look at Pell, and she did not look at the floor. She looked at Roman Ashby, dead level, and she said, I'll take the bet. The quiet that followed had a different texture than the quiet before. Roman blinked. For half a second, the showman's mask slipped, and something almost like surprise crossed his face, and then it was gone, replaced by a smile that was genuinely delighted, because this was so much better than what he'd planned. I'm sorry? $100,000, Delia said. Her voice was not loud. In the dead air, it didn't need to be. You said, anyone in the room? I'm in the room. Phones came up all around them, the little glowing rectangles tilting toward her, faces behind them already arranging themselves into the expressions people wear when they're about to watch someone get destroyed. This was going to be unmissable. The hedge fund king and the bus girl. They were already drafting the captions. Delia. Pell had her by the elbow, hissing, Apologize. Go home, please. She took her arm back, gently, the way you'd remove a child's hand from a stove. He made an open offer, she said. I'm accepting it. Roman laughed, a sharp bark of a thing genuinely entertained now. The help wants to cook. He swept his arm toward the range like a host. By all means, but let's give it some stakes, If you lose, and you will lose, you don't just slink back to the kitchen. You stand in the middle of this room, you look at my guests, and you tell them, out loud, that everything I said about you is true, that you were born to carry plates and nothing more. He let it hang, and when I win, my check stays in my pocket, and you find another way to pay for whatever it is people like you are always behind on. She didn't flinch, and when I win, she said, the check clears in the morning. He stepped aside and gestured at the station with the flourish of a man waving a bull toward a cape. The range is yours. She crossed the room, and with every step the last 8 years seemed to come off her like a coat she'd been wearing too long in a warm building. The smell of the truffle oil and the burnt sugar of his gastrique faded, and in its place, just for her, came the ghost smell of the teaching kitchen in Hyde Park at 6 in the morning. Cold steel, sour mop water, the green snap of herbs being run through a robot coupe 2 rooms over. She reached the pass. She did not pick up his pan. She reached back and untied the catering apron she'd been issued, the cheap one with the company logo, and she let it fall to the floor behind her. Then she took a clean chef's apron off the hook by the range and tied it on, double-wrapped, the strings to the front, and knotted the way working cooks tie them, and the small competence of that single motion made 2 of the executives stop laughing. "Is she serious?" somebody whispered. "Get Ashby's face when she folds." She ignored them. She opened the lowboy under the range. She had maybe 90 seconds to take inventory of a working station she'd never touched, and her eyes moved across it the way a pianist's hand finds the keys in the dark. Eggs, good ones, in a flat by the speed rack. A wedge of cold butter. A bunch of chives, slightly wilted. 3 pans hanging within reach, and she chose the smallest, a worn non-stick 8-inch, with a handle that had been gripped by 1,000 hands, because she had decided, somewhere between the marble floor and the range, exactly what she was going to make. She wasn't going to outflame him. She wasn't going to set anything on fire, or lay gold on anything, or reach for a single thing that photographed. She had watched him build a monument to himself, and she had seen the cracks in it, and she knew the surest way to expose a man who only knew how to shout was to whisper. She was going to make him an omelette. A few of the guests actually snickered when they saw the eggs come out. Even Roman's mouth twitched toward a sneer, because what kind of answer was that? Eggs. A thing a college kid scrambles at 2 in the morning. But Chef Wexler used to say there was no place on earth for a cook to hide like the inside of a French omelette. No sauce to drown a mistake. No char to fake depth. 3 eggs, butter, salt, heat, and the truth about your hands. He used to fail students on it for a single spot of brown. Anyone can build a cathedral, he'd told her once, the only time he ever came close to tenderness. Tell me what you can do with 3 eggs and 4 minutes, and I'll tell you whether you're a cook. She cracked 3 into a bowl one-handed, the shells parting clean, and beat them with a fork, not a whisk, a fork, until they ran smooth and pale, no string of white left, no air she didn't want. She set the small pan over the flame and let it come up, holding her palm above the surface to read the heat the way you read a face. She cut a knob of butter, the size of a walnut, and dropped it in. And when it stopped foaming, right at the breath before it could take any color, she poured. And then her hand did the thing the room had never seen before, and would never forget. She moved the pan and the fork together, the fork tip stirring fast little circles through the eggs, while the other hand shook the pan in a steady rhythm, the whole motion so quick and so soft it looked less like cooking than like something the eggs were doing to themselves. No browning, not a fleck. The curds formed tiny and tender and even, a custard barely set, and the smell that came up off the pan, clean, sweet, of nothing but good eggs and good butter, silenced the snickering at the front tables like a hand laid over a mouth. She tilted the pan. She tapped the handle with the heel of her palm, twice, and the omelette folded itself, rolling up against the far lip into a perfect pale seam, and she turned it out onto a warm plate so that it landed with the fold underneath, and the surface unbroken, a smooth golden ovoid the color of the inside of a shell. She scattered the chives. She laid a single thin curl of cold butter on top to gloss as it melted, and she stepped back and she set the fork down on the steel with a small final click. The whole thing had taken under 3 minutes. It looked like nothing. It looked like breakfast. Nobody clapped. Roman walked to the plate. He picked up a fork, his own, off the pass, and he cut into it, and the omelette gave under the tines the way a custard gives, and the inside, when it opened, was barely set, glossy, a pale river still running at the center, what the French call bavous, and what almost no one in America can be trusted to do, without either undercooking it to slime or murdering it brown. He put it in his mouth, and the room watched Roman Ashby's face change. He had eaten in every great room on earth. He knew, the second it hit his palate, exactly what he was tasting, and it was the one thing his entire flaming monument had not had. It tasted like care. It tasted like a person who had nothing left to prove, and everything to say, saying it quietly. It was the best single bite of food that had been made in his restaurant in 9 years, and he had not made it, and a busgirl had with eggs in 3 minutes, while he stood there in his costume whites. He set the fork down very carefully. The color was leaving his face in stages. The phones which had come up to record a catastrophe were no longer pointed at her. They were pointed at him. "A trick," Roman said. His voice had lost its bottom. "A party trick. Anybody can drill one dish into their hands until it runs on muscle memory. That's not cooking, that's repetition. That's a circus dog." The room had gone very quiet, and it was a different quiet again, the quiet of 46 people who can all see the terms of a bet and all know who lost it. "You made one egg dish," he went on, louder now, climbing, trying to find the floor under himself. "That doesn't make you a chef. That makes you somebody with a good party piece. If you want $100,000 of my money, you don't get to choose the easy ground." He pulled his phone out of his pocket, swiping at it with a thumb that wasn't entirely steady, and he held it up. "I've got a sauce. It's mine. 8 years I've made it, and no critic in this city has ever reverse-engineered it." "You're so good with your hands?" He jabbed the phone toward her, then turned and snapped his fingers at a runner, who came forward with a small white ramekin from the kitchen, a deep amber sauce inside it, gone glossy and tight. "Taste that, then stand at that range and build it from scratch. Every component, blind, no recipe, right now. If you can't, you stand in the middle of my floor and you say what we agreed you'd say." It was a cruelty with no entertainment left in it. A few of the junior partners looked away. To reconstruct a developed sauce blind from a single taste with no notes. It wasn't a test of skill, it was a humiliation dressed as one, designed to be failed. Delia looked at the ramekin. She looked at him. "You want me to reverse a finished demi-off one taste," she said quietly, "standing up in front of your guests." "What's wrong?" Roman said, the sneer crawling back. "Can't read what's in front of you? Or are you finally ready to admit you're out of your depth, sweetheart? She doesn't need to taste it." The voice came from the back of the room, and it wasn't loud, but it carried the way certain voices do, the way a cello carries under a wall of brass. Everyone turned. A woman rose from the corner booth where she'd been sitting alone all evening, a glass of untouched red in front of her, a presence the junior staff had been quietly speculating about for 2 hours without anyone willing to confirm. She was somewhere past 70. She wore a plain dove-grey suit, no jewelry, in a sea of bespoke tailoring and gold, and she stood with the help of a black cane, and she crossed the floor toward the range with the unhurried tap of someone who has nowhere she needs to be faster than she chooses to go. Roman's face did a complicated thing. "Madame Sauveterre, we're only having a little fun here." The woman did not look at him. Her eyes, sharp, pale, very tired and very kind, were fixed on Delia. She stopped a few feet from the pass. It was Vivienne Sauveterre, the first American to take a gold at the Bocuse d'Or 4 decades back, when no American was supposed to be able to. A woman who had earned and kept 3 stars for 30 years on a single block in Lyon before coming home, who had trained more great chefs than any cooking school in the country, whose name on a menu was a benediction, and whose disapproval had ended careers. Roman had flown her in and seated her in the place of honor for one reason. He wanted her to lend her name to a foundation his group was launching, the kind that lowers a tax bill while it raises a reputation. He had been planning to make his ask over the cheese course. "I wondered where you'd gone," Vivienne said softly to Delia, and her voice had a crack of real grief in it. "Bernard looked for you, you know. Right up to the end. He never stopped asking after the girl from Pennsylvania." A breath went through the room. She meant Bernard Wexler, the instructor, the hard old Frenchman who died 2 winters ago, and who, it turned out, had spent his last good years trying to find out what had become of the most gifted student he'd ever stood behind. Delia's hands, steady through everything else, went still. Her throat worked. "My father got sick, madame," she said very low, and, for the first time all evening, her voice broke clean in two. "There was no one else. I had to leave Hyde Park. I had to work." Vivienne nodded slowly, and you could see her understand the whole shape of it in an instant, the years of it, the cost. Then she turned, and she looked at Roman Ashby, and the kindness left her face entirely. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "you asked this young woman to reconstruct a sauce blind as if it were the height of the discipline. Let me tell you something you've evidently forgotten in all your years of not cooking." Her voice rose, clear and unsparing, reaching every table. "5 years ago I sat on the international jury at Lyon. This is Delia Marsh. She was the youngest competitor to qualify out of the United States in 20 years. She built a pâté en croûte in front of that jury, by hand, in the time allowed, under those lights, that 3 judges who had given their entire lives to this craft could not find a single fault in. One of them wept. She was the favorite to medal before she withdrew the week of the final to go home to her father. She let that land. She does not need to taste your sauce, Mr. Ashby. She could have taught you to make it." Every drop of color was gone from Roman's face. He had the look of a man who has stepped off a ledge in the dark and is only now, mid-air, understanding that there is no floor. "And as for what you served them tonight..." Vivienne walked the last few feet to the pass, picked up his abandoned fork, and took a single small bite of the foie gras dish still sitting there gone cold under its gold leaf. She chewed once, twice, and set the fork down with a contempt so quiet it was almost gentle. "Your liver is scorched. Your gastrique broke before it ever left the pan. You plated a photograph. There is no one home in this food, Mr. Ashby. There hasn't been for years." She turned to the room. "This young woman cooked you the truth with 3 eggs, and you tried to make her grovel for it. She didn't beat you. She was simply, the entire time, a different order of thing than you, and you couldn't bear it." The silence in the private room was total. 46 people in the most expensive square footage in Lower Manhattan, and not one of them breathing. The untouchable king of Ashby hospitality had been opened up and emptied out in front of every person whose respect he had spent 20 years buying. Vivienne lifted her cane and pointed it at the check still lying on the steel pass, the violet zeros catching the light. "Pay the girl, Mr. Ashby," she said, "before I make a phone call to the food desk at the Times and tell them exactly what kind of man wants his name on a foundation for young chefs." Roman Ashby was trapped, and he knew it, and the knowing was written on him for everyone to read. His hand shook as he reached for the fountain pen. He uncapped it. He signed his name under the violet zeros, his signature smaller and meaner than it had been when he'd written it as a joke. He did not hand the check to her. He slid it across the steel, the way you push something away from yourself, and he could not make his eyes come up off the pass. Delia picked it up, $100,000. Enough to clear what was left of her father's debt to the last cent. Enough to put Eli through every semester until he wore the badge he wanted. Enough, maybe after all of it, to buy back 4 mornings a week at a range, and start being the thing she'd been built to be before the world came for her family. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She folded the check once and put it in the pocket of the chef's apron, and then she untied the apron, and she folded that too, neatly, the way Wexler had drilled into her, and she set it on the lip of the pass where the next cook would find it clean. She looked at Roman one more time, and she gave him back his own speech, the one about creators and servers, the one he'd built his whole night on. "You said some people are born to make things," she said, "and the rest are born to carry. You had it backward, Mr. Ashby. Nobody's born to either one. You earn the right to make something every single morning. With your hands, when nobody's filming. You should try it sometime. I think you'd find out who you actually are." She crossed the floor without hurrying, past the frozen executives and their lowered phones, past Pell, who had no words left in him, past Vivienne Sauveterre, who reached out as she passed and pressed something into her hand, a small cream-colored card with a number on it, and 3 words written under the number in a fountain pen hand that shook a little with age. "When you're ready." Delia closed her fingers around it. She pushed through the double doors and out into the cool of the service hallway, and the doors swung shut behind her on a room full of the richest people in the city, sitting in a silence none of them would ever quite be able to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. She found the service elevator. She rode it down 44 floors with her own reflection for company, a tired woman in a black uniform with a folded check and a cream-colored card in her pockets, and somewhere around the 20th floor she started to laugh, and somewhere around the 10th the laughing turned into something else, and by the time the doors opened on the lobby, she had wiped her face and she was steady again, and she walked out into the New York night to go call her brother and tell him not to worry about Friday.